The video you're seeing was taken in Belarus in 2011, and it takes place after a very disturbing but largely forgotten event. There's plenty of footage of this still preserved here on the internet. It's absolutely wild, and it's terrifying to think that none of the people in this footage have any idea about what's going to happen to them. I'll tell you everything, but as usual, let's get into the backstories first. In early 2011, Belarus was under pressure and facing considerable economic stress. The country was coming off of a very contentious presidential election in December 2010, and within hours of the announcement, thousands of protesters gathered in central Minsk, accusing the government of rigging the vote. The security response was fast and forceful, and this pretty much set the tone going into early 2011. And so inside their capital, Minsk, people got used to the sight of security patrols. Surveillance increased and public gatherings were discouraged, but daily life didn't stop. People still went to work, rode the buses, and followed their routines. Beneath the streets, the Minsk Metro moved thousands every day. It was modern and heavily used, especially the central stations where 3 lines converged. Of those stations, one was located in the administrative core of the city, just steps from the presidential offices, parliament, and Independence Square. For anyone moving through the city center, this was a necessary hub, but it's also where the disturbing part of our story begins. On Monday, April 11th, 2011, the station was packed as usual. It was just before 6 p.m., so very much rush hour, and many workers were heading home. The platforms at the station were quickly filling with people waiting for the next train, and nearby, a group stood near a long concrete bench in the middle of the platform, directly in the path of the incoming cars that the train pulled in. And then suddenly, this happened. Out of nowhere, a giant explosion occurred. The blast tore open the platform and sent tiles flying into the air. A crater split open beneath the bench, the station's lighting collapsed. Shrapnel, metal fragments, and smoke filled the confined space. In total, 15 people lost their lives and over 300 were injured. Some lost limbs, others suffered burns or permanent damage from shrapnel, and survivors described not knowing where the exit was. Police and emergency workers were on the scene within minutes. The station was sealed off and people managed to gain their composure back and leave in an orderly fashion. Of course, a full evacuation of the area was a priority. Investigators from the Belarusian KGB, the country's main state security agency, arrived before nightfall. And now the question was obvious. What was the source of this horrible event? So naturally, especially given tension with the government, there was no question that this had been a deliberate act, and it didn't take long before authorities turned to the station's CCTV system. Thankfully, the footage was pretty clear, and after hours of studying the main cameras, they did piece it together. They spotted a young man whose behavior was clearly very suspicious. He was seen entering the station shortly before the blast. He was carrying a dark bag and walking calmly. He then placed the bag directly under the bench on the platform, exactly where the source of the explosion was. Following this, we can see him turn and leave, and less than 2 minutes later, the explosion hit. Within just 24 hours, due to a facial composite release, several people were arrested, but 2 men were focused in on. Both of them were 25 and from outside of Minsk. Authorities identified one as a man who built and planted the bomb, and the other, they claimed, helped him destroy the evidence and conceal his involvement, which clearly did not work very well. Apparently, authorities were thoroughly impressed with the sophistication and build quality of this bomb. The explosive contained metal fragments like nails and bearings and had a blast power equivalent of 5 to 7 kilograms of TNT. It even shook trains at adjacent stations. This thing was very powerful. After getting fingerprints, investigators even linked the two to multiple unsolved bombings from earlier years. In 2005, a pair of minor explosions in a separate city injured dozens but have never been solved. And in 2008, a bomb detonated during Belarus's Independence Day concert, attended by the president. That blast had also gone unsolved. And now the investigators seemingly knew that the same men were responsible for all of it. Both men confessed, though one later said he retracted his statement, and they moved forward. When legal proceedings began, the trial moved fast. By September, just 5 months after the Minsk Metro bombing, both men were on trial in front of the Supreme Court. There was no jury, and both were convicted and sentenced to death by firing squad. Belarus is actually one of only 2 countries in Europe that has not completely abolished capital punishment. And here, executions are done with a single gunshot to the back of the head, but their date and location are not made public. The families are notified but never told where the bodies are buried, and sometime in early March of 2012, the executions were carried out and the families were notified. Some human rights organizations criticize the speed of the case and raise concerns about whether the confessions were reliable. The government released very little additional evidence, and no public motive was ever truly established. They were factory workers, and neither was affiliated with any political or extremist group, and because of this, there were a lot of theories at the time that their own government may have been in on this. Again, this is to be expected when things are this tense, and the reality is, this is not a country that I'm from, and so speculating on that based upon foreign articles and translations probably isn't the right thing to do, but I did read some theories, and any of my viewers from Belarus are free to give me more context if they have any. I encourage it. The station reopened just days after the bombing, which many viewed as a sign of strength. Structural repairs were completed quickly, and life in the capital continued. But for the families of the victims, and for many watching the investigation unfold, a lot of questions still remained, and honestly this video really puts into perspective how terrifying such a thing must have been. Obviously I can't show every single clip that I found, but it's enough to get an idea. Something about being trapped underground like this during an attack has always spooked me. Rest in peace to all of the innocent people who passed as a result of this, and I hope the injured were able to recover and move past the associated trauma. This story begins in a district called Horst in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm sorry about that pronunciation. On the morning of Thursday, March 26, 1998, 13-year-old Tristan Brübach wasn't exactly feeling great. He'd been dealing with some back pain from a scuffle that he got into with his friend a few days back, and he actually mentioned to someone that he wanted to go get it checked out. This was a school day though, so rather than skipping school altogether, he decided to just show up for the day, figuring he could deal with it a little longer. So Tristan went to school and pushed through the pain, but after lunch at around 1:30 in the afternoon, his back pain started to get even worse, and so his homeroom teacher gave him permission to leave early, finally giving him a chance to head to the doctor. So he left school, and everyone assumed that was his plan. And Tristan was seen not long after this boarding a bus near the school. He took a seat in the back as he usually does, and the bus headed in the direction of the Horst train station. This would be around the last time that his best friend Boris actually remembers seeing him on this day, though someone else did remember spotting him at the station at around 2:15 or 2:25 p.m., still alone. And roughly an hour later came the last known sighting of Tristan alive. At around 3:10 to 3:20 p.m., a witness saw him sitting on a bench in a small park not far from the train station, and he was actually with this witness petting her dog. It said that Tristan was a relatively shy and reserved guy, but when it came to animals, he immediately opened up to people, particularly those walking dogs. He also had his own pet rabbit and was super fond of animals as a whole. Anyways, it said that petting this dog was just an ordinary friendly moment, but as she walked away, she noticed two men approaching and they sat down on the bench next to Tristan. She described them as appearing foreign, but that was all she knew. Tristan did smoke cigarettes, he was going through a bit of a phase, so some theorized that he was asking them for one. We don't actually know for sure, but either way, sometime shortly after that, likely around 3:20 to 3:30 p.m., Tristan got up and started walking west. He was going towards the south entrance of a tunnel that ran underneath railway tracks and was often used by locals as a shortcut. Tristan lived on the other side, north of the tunnel, so it's assumed he was just on his way home. But unfortunately, something would happen after leaving that bench and before reaching the tunnel that has absolutely haunted investigators and people across Germany for decades. Before reaching the south entrance of the tunnel, Tristan was killed, and this was not mild. The attack was horrifying and incredibly personal. The killer began by striking Tristan in the face, then putting him in a headlock until he passed out. After that, the killer took out a knife and he was almost fully decapitated. And horribly from here, Tristan slowly faded away in the shallow stream that runs into the tunnel. But the horror did not end there. After taking him out, the perpetrator dragged Tristan further into the tunnel. Here, he used a knife to make calculated, deliberate cuts, removing sections of skin and muscle from the backs of Tristan's thighs, and perhaps most despicably, he even removed his testicles with what police called a professional incision. Instead of fleeing the scene right away, the person responsible even took the time to reposition his body. He laid Tristan out on the concrete floor of the tunnel, pulled his jacket up over his face, and redressed him, pulling up his pants and placing his shoes on his hips and thighs, seemingly to cover the wounds. The killer ended up eventually taking one of his shoes, and some criminologists have suggested that this behavior might fit what's called undoing, a psychological act where the assailant tries to symbolically repair or correct the horror of what they just did. Around 3:30 to 3:40 p.m., just minutes after the suspected time of death, 3 teenagers were playing at a nearby playground near the tunnel's north entrance. They decided to use the tunnel as a shortcut to the train station, but as they started to walk through it, they spotted the silhouette of a man crouched over something on the concrete. And this creeped them out enough that they turned around and took another route. They had no idea what they just witnessed. Around 4 p.m., 2 other children entered the tunnel, and this time they didn't turn back. They found Tristan's body and immediately went to get help. One of them contacted an adult who walked over to the scene himself to confirm what they'd just seen, but for reasons that have never been fully clarified, the police weren't contacted until sometime shortly after 5 p.m., so a whole hour after they spotted him. When investigators arrived, they found more than just a horrific crime scene. At the south entrance to the tunnel, Tristan's school bag had been emptied, so they didn't have the actual bag, but they did have the books that were in it. On one of the notebooks, investigators found smears from a serrated knife, indicating that the killer had just wiped the blade clean on the pages, and the most important clue was also found, a fingerprint, not Tristan's, but it was coated with Tristan's bodily fluids. Police suspect the killer may have placed the removed parts into a backpack and carried them away from the scene, but that's never been proven, and neither the knife nor the missing body parts have ever been found. To this day, no one has been arrested for what happened to Tristan Brübach. There are many theories, but no arrests. Some people have connected his killer to being the same person who was accused for Madeleine McCann, the guy I actually mentioned a few videos ago, Christian Bruckner. Others think this was deeply personal, and many suspect the men on the bench, but no one knows. It's also said that over 23,000 tips have been processed and investigated to date. Some friends said that Tristan would regularly meet grown men for cigarettes or money and theorized that there could have been some sort of trafficking involved here. He was a latchkey kid and very independent for his age though, so we just don't know. And in the aftermath, some more disturbing things happened. On March 25th, 1999, his actual backpack was found by a random person in a nearby forest, and according to a website dedicated to his case, inside were a map of Germany written in Czech and a blue garbage bag. At the time, Czech workers were housed near the location where the backpack was found, building an ICE high-speed rail line. Corresponding police investigations in Eastern Europe, including those via Prague television, were unsuccessful. The backpack could have been left by the perpetrator, but it also could have been left by another unknown person. So yeah, maybe someone just found it when it was dumped and used it, or maybe this did belong to the one responsible. And perhaps most horrifically, on the night of October 7th to 8th, 1999, so just 4 days after Tristan's birthday on October 3rd and about a year and a half after his murder, an unknown person went to Tristan's grave. They carefully picked out the flowers on the grave and placed them beside it, and laid down a plastic sheet that he'd brought with him to neatly separate the excavated earth from the clay. He then dug 1 to 2 meters deep, but was unable to reach the coffin and open it. Presumably, he was disturbed and fled. Tristan's grandmother found her grandson's grave open the next morning. I cannot even imagine what this poor family already had to go through, only for the grandmother to eventually witness that. It blows my mind. This case is unbelievably perplexing, and honestly, this is also very much a summary of the events. This could have its own video entirely. There are some great videos out there, most of them are in German, but Dark Curiosities covers this in depth too if you'd like to know more about it, and just Tristan's backstory in general. In 2008, a composite sketch was released as several witnesses nearby reported seeing a blonde man with a braid and a scar. But still, this case remains unsolved. Rest in peace to poor Tristan. This topic has been sitting on my list for a few months, and that's because I was hoping to be able to find its source and tell you the backstory, but as of now, it appears to fall into the category of unidentified media. Me, as well as everyone I've asked, have not been able to find out any more details on this, other than what I'm about to tell you. But we were able to solve the last one, so maybe we can get to the bottom of this. Let me explain it. I first saw this as a short segment in the infamous Banned from Television series, which was a 90s and early 2000s mixtape trilogy that many of you are probably familiar with. The trilogy also has many stories in it that I've covered before. They were a big part of the first 10 or so volumes of this series. If you're not familiar what Banned from Television was, it was essentially a compilation of very dark footage from around the world that otherwise would not have been allowed on television, hence the name. These were actually very popular back in the day, like you'd find them in mixed bins and stuff at stores that you would never expect to find this sort of thing in. And a lot of the things that you saw covered in these could also be found in other shock mixtapes of the time. Anyways, the video I wanted to discuss was just a short entry in Banned from Television. It was supposedly recorded in Argentina, and it's a series of behind-the-scenes shots of an action movie that was being made many decades ago. There's a few different scenes that are shown, but the main section is of a film crew recording a car chase that was going to be a big part of the movie. And the first take of this chase ended up actually being really good. The director liked it, but because they were already out there and were geared up, he figured let's just do one more take or two and then move on. So that's what they did. The crew restarted, the chase began, and then this time around something completely unexpected and completely horrible ended up happening. One of the cars that were part of the chase overshoots a certain section of the course and then backs up to restart for another take. But while backing up to reset to the starting point, the vehicle ends up making a sharp left and driving off of an embankment where two cameramen are sitting, posted up and filming. They see this happening but don't have enough time to get out of the way, and I can't show you what happens next, but it is bad, like really bad. The weight of the car completely crushes. The segment is then replayed in slow motion, and that's it. It goes on to the next topic. And that's all we really know regarding this case. We don't know what the planned movie was supposed to be called, what year this happened, where in Argentina it happened, if it was even in Argentina at all. Banned from Television's known for getting locations wrong, and on top of this we don't know who the victims were, if any of them somehow survived this incident, or what happened afterwards. It really is just pretty impossible to research. I could not find anything. I used keywords, I translated, I used certain time ranges on Google, I even ended up reverse image searching certain frames and it turned up nothing. I do want to know more on this. Maybe it'll be the beginning of another hunt, or maybe one of you guys knows something. Either way, I'm curious to see where this goes from here. In the early 1900s, Odin, Indiana was really just a kind of town where everyone knew everyone and people kept their doors unlocked, and even to this day it still is just a very small town. But for this entry we have to go back to the summer of 1940, where a family called the Hackler family and their farmhouse became the center of attention. Now, I'm just letting you know ahead, because of dates, there's no photos of any of these family members, but just bear with me because I promise you it's an incredibly interesting and very well documented story. On the morning of June 21st, 1940, 59-year-old William Hackler was about halfway through his delivery route for a job he had with the Graham Cheese Factory. Farming was his primary job, but he also did deliveries with them to help support his wife, 56-year-old Minnie, and their 7 children, whose ages ranged from 15 to 39. By all accounts, this was just another rural family of the time living an ordinary life. At some point that morning while doing deliveries, William got word that a fire had broken out at his home. It really just sounded minor though, and he was told there wasn't any damage to worry about, so he stayed the course and finished up his route. And when he got home at around 10 a.m., his wife filled him in. Strangely, their daughter, 21-year-old Dorothy, had actually spotted a strip of wallpaper on fire in an upstairs bedroom. It was odd for sure, but they actually didn't have electricity in the house, so the fire department figured maybe there was an old chimney behind the wall. As a result, they ripped off part of the wall and found nothing. There was no chimney. So the fire department left, thinking it was an isolated fluke situation and not really knowing what else to make of it. But the department didn't get very far, because shortly after, as Minnie was further explaining what had happened to her father William, another fire broke out right in front of them. And this time it was in the couple's bedroom on the opposite end of the house where the first one had broken out. This one started as just a small flare on the wallpaper, but it actually spread fast. The fire department was called back again, and again they were able to put it out, but despite this, the situation was not even close to over. In the hours that followed, fires began erupting all over the house. A bookshelf, one of the stairs, a calendar, a bedspread, even a pair of William's overalls hanging on a door all suddenly went up in flames. And at one point, flames even appeared in the center of the living room floor. Remember, these could not have been coming from electrical wires, heat sources, or fireplaces, and to make things even more bizarre, they weren't centralized in one spot. This was a small town, and so word spread very quickly. Curious neighbors and locals started showing up, some just wanting to help, and others really just trying to understand what was happening. 2 visitors inside the house said they watched one set of curtains burst into flames, and then shortly after, a second set on the opposite side of the same room did the same thing. And if you ask me personally, this is where the case gains a whole lot more credibility, because any family could come up with this sort of thing, but now we have many eyewitnesses from across the town also verifying that this was happening. It's extremely well documented in newspapers from the time. And so, by the end of the day, the Hacklers really had just run out of options, and as a result of this all, they gathered what they could, grabbed their bedding, and camped out on their own lawn under a tree. In total, 28 separate fires had started inside their home between morning and just before midnight. Suffice to say, this absolutely shook them. The structure itself didn't completely burn down, but the family was very shaken and desperate for answers. Fire investigators, locals, and anyone with a theory began offering explanations. Some said maybe the nails inside the walls had absorbed static from the home's lightning rods and were heating up. Some speculated about strange chemicals in the wallpaper glue reacting to the summer heat. There were ideas about magnetic fields or unknown combustion triggers or even paranormal origins like some sort of poltergeist. And of course, there were also whispers that maybe this was all staged. Maybe the family had made it up. But at the end of the day, none of these theories could be proven right or wrong. So that's when people started looking into the house's past. The Hackler farmhouse hadn't always belonged to them. After the Civil War, it was built by the Ketchum family, who all later passed away in the home from what was interestingly described as a burning fever. After this, it was sold to the Wilk family, and tragedy followed them too. One of the sons was killed in a hunting accident, and his father had him buried in a glass-lidded coffin on the property, so his face would, quote, never be forgotten. That's right, they literally watched him decompose. The father soon declared himself a spiritualist, and he believed his son spoke to him through knocks in the house, which he claimed happened regularly. And to make this even more interesting, less than a week after the fire outbreak, the Hacklers had enough. They simply just moved off the property. They didn't try to sell the house, but they did dismantle it. They took some of the wood that was still able to be reused and rebuilt their lives somewhere else. And to this day, no one has been able to explain what happened. Was this some freak chemical reaction? Was the place cursed? Or was someone in the family orchestrating it from behind the scenes? We really just don't know, but to me, I think this story has the makings to be much larger than it ever really was. There's far more eyewitnesses than just the family. They moved out within a week, and from what I can see, they never tried to capitalize off of this or sell any books. Not that this would invalidate it, get your money, but the fact that they never did certainly works in favor of its validity. I also saw an interesting theory under Cadaver's video on this topic from 4 to 5 years ago, and it's pretty cool. Fire department captain here, I have a theory. Rare occurrence and somewhat strange, but still in the realm of possibility. Linseed oil was a common chemical in multiple products that would be available on a farm during that time frame, from wood finish, animal feeds, machine lubricant, and leatherwork. It's also known to have a chemical reaction that generates a lot of heat when in contact with cotton-based fabrics, and in rare cases has been known to ignite at ambient temperatures when other factors exist, like static electricity, other chemicals being present, etc. Although it could help or hurt this theory if we knew what kind of work may have been done in the home on the day of the fires. My department actually assisted in an investigation not long ago where linseed oil wood finish left on a rag in a static charged room caused a fire. Luckily, it burned out before any major damage occurred. So I find that very interesting. I also saw a comment that made me laugh and said, "There's literally nothing in Odin but a really great Mexican restaurant and a very progressive group of Amish. They use smartphones and watch the Avengers. They're very cool people." I just found that funny, but truly, I find this mystery to be really fascinating, and I'm sure some of you may have some theories of your own, so I'd love to hear them, even though due to how old this is, it's unlikely we'll ever get a firm answer. Also, this entry was largely based on an amazing write-up by the Bones of Autumn on Reddit. Her level of care with these cases is just incredible, and she's also a great author. I'm actually reading one of her books right now. I highly recommend her. This isn't paid or anything. I just like to give credit to those who deserve it, especially when they're the main source of my research for an entry. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And as usual, if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. But if not, don't worry, I won't show up at your house or anything. Also, as usual, the sources and clippings that I used for my research in this video will be in the description below. See you guys very soon.